I'm not gonna lie, this might be my new favorite Sanderson book. As a standalone, this book had meaningful characters and a beautiful magic system. I also love that this book explores the idea of what is art. In this episode, we will examine the plot, discuss character growth, and analyze themes by looking at meaningful scenes. So let's start with the plot. The main conflict of this book was a simple one: save the spirits. It's nice to read a straightforward plot after reading so many books with complicated plots. In the exposition of this book, we are introduced again to our favorite narrator, Hoyd. Now, for the people who are not familiar with the Cosmere, Hoyd narrating this book might feel a bit jarring. He is using terms from other books in the Cosmere. I didn't feel it was as relatable at Tress when he was giving new terms that everyone would be familiar with, but it's pretty close. Now, for those of us who have read other Sanderson books, the narration in this book was very relatable and fun. I do feel like Tress was a bit more silly, and Sanderson really nails Hoyd's voice in this book. It's really nice to see how the books in the Cosmere are weaving themselves together and how everything's connected. It's like when you see an Easter egg or an allusion in different stories. It gives us a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of fun. I also thought the world building was well done. You get to see two different worlds, Yumi's world and Painter's world, as they go through a normal day in the life. What better way to see a world than through somebody else's eyes, right? This was so fun and unique. I've literally never seen that before in a book. It was also a unique magic system because although we've seen investiture before, this was different. Every world that we see in Sanderson's books has a little different way of tapping into investiture, and I loved that in this world, investiture was used through art. And also, I loved that the investiture powered their technology. We saw that a little bit in Sunlit Man, but I also feel like he was a bit out of the normal, right? Whereas this is their normal world, our day in our life. And we get to see the investiture in technology, which is really awesome. I loved the more modern setting, and I'm hoping to see this more in Mistborn Era 3. I'm super excited for that. Now let's break down the main conflict of this book. We are introduced to the main plot when the main character, Yumi, talks to a spirit who seems kind of like a Sprin. They seem very similar to me. And this spirit tells Yumi that all the spirits are trapped. It doesn't really say where, but they're in lots of pain and they need her help to be freed. In the next chapter, Yumi is transported out of her body, and Painter has now invaded her body. Now they must work together to solve the mystery of saving the trapped spirits, and neither of them has any idea how they're supposed to do that, or why the two of them were chosen. In the building action, we see Yumi and Painter learning each other's trades and trying to figure out why exactly the spirits chose them. Why did they chose Yumi? That one seemed pretty obvious, but why Painter? And for Painter, that seems to be a big deal. I absolutely love that Yumi's trade was stacking rocks because it's so absurd. And yet, we've all seen those rock stacks that are just beautiful. And then the way that they're able to do it, it's just amazing. So we know it's both difficult and that rock stacks actually can be beautiful. As Yumi and Painter learn more about each other's worlds, they learn more about themselves. Yumi teaches Painter how to stack like she was taught, and then learns that someone else can learn in a different way. The way she's taught is not the only way. She also learns how to paint from Painter. Painter and her learn many valuable lessons from each other. Painter learns more resilience from Yumi, and Yumi learns to be more assertive from Painter. Both learn to live in each other's worlds and learn how to function in them. Throughout the story, Yumi and Painter pick apart the mystery of the bound spirits. In Yumi's world, a group of scholars come with a machine, and they think that the spirit might be in there. They also think that the spirits might want them to find a specific nightmare in Painter's world, the nightmare that he found before he was lifted out of his own body. They finally figured out that it was indeed a machine that was causing the problems, but it was not a small machine in the village. It was a large machine somewhere else. After this revelation, Yumi and Painter are separated, and each gets control of their own bodies again, which leads us to the climax of the story. The climax of this book is when Yumi goes to Torio City and finds the very large machine that has trapped all of the spirits. When she gets there, she does not despair. She fights the machine by creating the most beautiful rock stack ever to have been stacked. At the same time, in Kilahito, Painter has assembled an army of painters, and they're trying to defend the city from a wave of nightmares that are attacking. They are holding a line when Painter has a revelation. When he sees Lin-Yun, the nightmare, he decides to paint her, and she appears as a person instead of a nightmare. In Torio, Yumi continues building her rock art and wins all of the other spirits, because art created by a person is always more beautiful than something that is made by a machine. In the city, Painter has made a bond with each of the nightmares and turned them back into people, and then they begin dissolving into black mist. Many of these citizens looked relieved as they have been trapped for thousands of years. As the people disappear, Painter walks to the shroud and feels his connection with Yumi as she fades away. If you don't cry in this moment, I think you're the robot, because this was so touching. It's just gorgeous. In the resolution, the city is in chaos because the shroud is receding and everyone is going crazy. Painter goes to his wall and finally finishes his mural. He draws Yumi sitting on a flying tree. I believe this act of creation draws the spirit state of Yumi to him. Because she's so heavenly invested, the spirits are part of her, and art is what draws the spirits. And then Painter is able to pull her out of the mist because she's so heavenly invested. I honestly thought that that was the most beautiful moment that I've ever read. It was kind of like a Beauty of the Beast kind of thing, but 20 times better. Yumi was my favorite character in this book, and that's because I connect with her. Because of the way she's brought up, she's strong and resilient. This is evident because she does not give up on her job, even though she's been doing it for thousands of years. Other Yokihidro have given up on the rigid structure of their job, or just given up on life completely. And Yumi has still been doing it, day after day. This could be because of her caretaker, but I also think it's because deep down, she wants to help. Yumi's character growth was subtle, yet of all the characters in this book, she changes the most. Through Painter, Yumi was able to explore the other side of herself that she wasn't able to explore as a Yokihidro. She's able to pick out her own clothes and watch TV and explore a city so different from her own or the ones that she'd seen. These things change how she views the world. Also, through training Painter and through learning how to draw, Yumi is able to see that the way she was treated was not the best way to learn. She's able to open her mind up to a different possibility and be less rigid in what she decided was right and what was wrong. However, the person who changes Yumi the most was Painter. I'll talk more about their time together in just a minute. Poor Painter. He really wanted to be a good guy, but because of something completely out of his control, he lost all of his confidence and his friends, and he had to live in his own head. This is not healthy for anyone, but it's definitely difficult for an artistic soul like Painter. However, through his training and time with Yumi, he's able to gain confidence and become the person he's always meant to be. For example, he stands up to Yumi's teacher Lin-Yun on behalf of Yumi and gets her more freedom in her life. Also, at the end of the novel, Painter is able to bring a group of painters together and fight the army of nightmares attacking the city. He becomes their leader and keeps the city safe. This is definitely something that Painter wouldn't have been able to do before he met Yumi. I think that one of the most important moments of Painter's character development comes when he talks to a member of the elite group of the Night Watch and learns that he hadn't been selected to join this group. It wasn't because he wasn't a beautiful painter. It's because he didn't have enough money. His status kept him from the job. I think that if he had known it earlier, it would have saved him so much pain and helped him to recover his relationships. However, learning this information gives him the confidence to fight the end battle. It also is a way for us to connect with Painter. It is a connection to a modern audience who has probably been through a situation like this at least once in their lives. There weren't too many other characters in this book, and the other characters were mostly static stock characters. They were fun and a bit whimsical, but they didn't really add much to the value of the overall story. However, I would like to discuss Hoid and Design, since they are characters we've met before in other Cosmere novels. Personally, I preferred Hoid as the narrator in this book much more than I did in Tress and the Emerald Sea. I do think that both books have similar narration, but I think that Sanderson provided a mix of seriousness and whimsy in this book, where there are more silly scenes in Tress that I think detract from the value of the novel. Hoid is a great narrator because he provides us with insights into a world that we're unfamiliar with in almost a satirical way. For example, but then again, there's nothing intrinsically valuable about any kind of art. That's not me complaining or making light. It's one of the most wonderful aspects of art. The fact that people decide what is beautiful. We don't get to decide what is food and what is not. Yes, exceptions exist, don't be pedantic. But we absolutely get to decide what counts as art. If Yumi's people wanted to declare that rock arrangements surpassed painting or sculpture as an artistic creation, well, I personally found it fascinating. The spirits agreed. He's being both silly and serious when explaining a part of Yumi's world. I love these little asides because it adds character and humor to the book, but it also gives us wisdom and insights to the themes of this book. Another character that gives us humor is Design. Design is Hoid's bonded Sprin. I thought it was interesting that she gets to be human in this book. I wonder if he's setting up for anything in the future or if it's just something that happens here. Guess we'll see. Design plays an interesting role in this book, but I do think she's mostly there for comedic relief. I thought she was a great addition to the novel. I also really loved this particular interaction with Painter. He basked in the heat one last time. I love that Yumi understands. She's been there. She's one of the people I've met who knows how it feels to give yourself to art. That sounds like a terrible reason for liking someone, Design says. It's the way humans do things. A stupid way, Design said. How would you do it? With a formula, she said. Find complementary sets of attributes that fit a proper matrix. He shook his head, smiling. I wish there were a formula, Design. If there were, I could fix this. End quote. I love her logic. If only it were that simple. Design is a logic Sprin, and I'm sure she knows a number of things about patterns and designs in art. Her being in this story was a fun addition, but I do not think that anything Sanderson does is void of purpose, or is only for one purpose. She would be at home with a place where you fight monsters with lines, patterns, and geometry. Let's move to the themes of this book. Starting with Yumi and Painter's relationship. This is a forced proximity romance, where characters are forced to spend time with one another. What's unique to this forced proximity is that we get to explore two different whole worlds, and now we're not forced into a room or a other small space. I also thought that the body swapping was an interesting mechanic because it shows the duality of this world, and it forces Yumi and Painter to see each other's worlds through each other's eyes. Painter and Yumi are good for each other because they help each other to see the best in themselves, and they make each other want to be better. Yes, they are trying to improve so that they can save the spirits, but also they're trying to oppress the other person. My favorite Yumi and Painter moment is the carnival. In this scene, both characters are able to experience the fun part of life through each other. We don't often see that in epic fantasy novels. It's something fun, like going to a carnival. But in this, we get to see them relax. Painter gets to introduce Yumi to a new experience, and he's able to live it through her eyes. It's also a fun nod to a modern audience who would understand dating and carnivals. I was surprised by the end of this novel. I was certain that Yumi and Painter were not going to end up together. About halfway through the book, Painter says, "Not all stories can end happy." In that moment, I literally stood up, and if I was holding a book, I would have thrown it at Brando Sanderson himself, and I cursed him. However, once Yumi and Painter were separated, there was still a connection to each other, and even though they are separated from some distance, they still have that connection. When Yumi sacrifices herself, she finds strength in knowing she is helping Painter and her new friend she's made. I do love these two and am ultimately happy that they end up together. It just makes sense that because she's so heavily invested that she would be able to save herself from becoming just a memory. Just like design, she's able to make herself into a person. I wonder if this is something we'll see with other characters in the future. It almost feels like she's an avatar with how much investiture she has, but I think that's definitely a stretch, right? The next thing I like to talk about is duality. Like in life, everything in this book has its opposite. The Heian is a separation of two colors. When the spirits of this world change into technology, they split and leave a copy of themselves. Yumi lives in a world of heat and warmth, and Painter lives in a world of darkness and cold. Everything in this book lends itself to duality, which is why the body swapping of Painter and Yumi makes sense. They both have a spirit and bodies, and somehow the spirits were able to weld the two souls together. So why did Sanderson include that in this book? Good question. I think that all of us are capable of both good and evil. We are complex individuals, just like Painter. Painter really wanted what was best for his friends and the people he loved, and when he couldn't be that, instead of confronting his feelings, he lies. Was that a good choice? Certainly not, but it also gave his friends hope when he was completely devoid of it. People are capable of both good and bad things. Good people sometimes make bad decisions, and bad people sometimes make good decisions. We are all a sum of our dual natures, and we can always make a different choice. I think that's what Sanderson was trying to show us with the Heian lights, because like in many planets, there are two gods with opposite charges. This is how we see their divinity. But he also could have chosen it as a reflection of us. We are our bodies and our souls. We have to figure out how those two things go together. Lastly, let's talk about art. Art plays an important part of this book. Both of our main characters are artists, and in this world, art is the way to connect with the divine. I cannot count the number of times in which Hoy talks about art, and it's important to us as civilized people. My favorite moment in this book is when Yumi battles the machine to create the greatest rock stack that's ever been made. This moment to me was the main reason that Sanderson wrote this novel, though I'm sure he had many. In our world right now, we are facing the robot versus human art conundrum. Can AI really make art? I think what Sanderson is trying to say is that human art will always be more important to our society than art made by a machine, because a machine can't really capture what it means to be human. Here's a quote that shows this. "This was art, something the machine, however capable in its technical details, can never understand. Because art is, and always has been, about what it does to us, to the one shaping it, and the one experiencing it." End quote. As far as my understanding of AI is that it cannot experience human emotion, so it cannot create true art. It's only capable of imitation, and therefore cannot capture human emotion. Art is such an important part of who we are and our stories. Another thing Sanderson seems to be doing in this novel is critiquing storytelling. Here's an example of us. Stories explain us. You want to define what makes a human being different from an animal? I can do it in one word or 1,000. Sad stories, exultant ones, didactic morality tales, frivolous yarns that paradoxically carry too much meaning. We need stories. I love this quote for so many reasons. First of all, I agree with this statement. Stories are what make us human and what help us connect to one another. Before we can really understand a person and their lives, we must hear their whole story. It also sums up Hoyd's role in the Cosmere. He appears to heroes in the moments that they need them, to give them a story to get through. We see this with Kaladin most notably. These stories indirectly help the character get through whatever it is they need to get through. I also thought that this was an artfully written section. If you could see it, you would see it. But you can't. So, let me talk about it just a second. In this section, Sanderson uses a list of fragments instead of a list with commas. He says sad stories, period, exultant ones, period, didactic morality tales, period, frivolous yarns, etc. I love the use of a fragment, especially a list of fragments. That's a fun little artistic nod. And I also love in this last sentence, it says we need stories, and the word need is italicized, giving you that important note. So not only is Sanderson a great storyteller, but he uses grammar in an artistic way, kind of like poetry, which to me is just chef's kiss, most brilliant thing in the world. Yes, Hoyd is an important storyteller, but I think on a deeper level, this is Sanderson giving us his purpose as well. I, for one, am grateful for his stories, and I know many of his fans are also. The last topic I'd like to discuss is friendship and love. In this novel, we get to see Yumi and Painter fall in love with each other. This is significant because at first they don't seem to get along, but because of their situation, they're able to see the world through each other's eyes. At first, Yumi thinks that Painter is a liar. Then she has this confirmed. But instead of giving into that narrative, Yumi defends Painter. She has seen his true character and understands how he must have felt when he lied to all his friends. Likewise, Painter sees what Yumi had been through throughout her life and admires her for her dedication and resilience. Love in this case goes beyond physical attraction, but these two characters love each other for who they are on the inside. They literally have a spiritual connection that forces them to see each other for who they are. I loved this quote here at the end. It says, "You know what I am, Yumi," he said. "What I've done. We have to confront that, deal with that." "Do we?" she asks, her voice growing small. "Do we really have to? Ignoring my problems is what got me into this situation." "What are we ignoring?" she said. "I heard what you said. I heard what they said. I know." She met his eyes. "I know. We confronted it. There. Done. Now let's go out." I love this moment for two reasons. First of all, Painter finally realizes what his problem has been, and he finally has the courage to talk about it. It takes bravery to grow out of your own behavior, especially if it makes you uncomfortable. However, he's willing to own up to his mistakes and become a better person for her. Also in this moment, we see Yumi forgive him. I think that she understands how Painter must have felt in that moment. His art was truly beautiful, and to be rejected by that group must have crushed him. She forgives him for his faults and lets him be him. What a beautiful moment of true love and understanding. Let's look at this quote from the very end of the book. It says, That said, it wasn't a good kiss. Considering the limited experiences of the ones responsible, it won't surprise you. Yet, for two people whose only previous brushes with romance involved some particularly aspirational daydreams, it worked well enough. Plus, here's the thing. A kiss doesn't really need to be good to be valuable. It doesn't serve any real purpose. It's valued solely because the person you share it with. Things only have the value we give them, and likewise, actions can be worth whatever we decide them to be worth. And so, to these two, that kiss was priceless. This was a perfect quote to end with because it combines the idea for what is art and what is romance. Just like with art, our connections with others are foundational to our experiences as humans. As we learned in the pandemic, people do not function well in isolation. We need to rely on each other, to trust one another, to be there for each other. These two souls were very isolated before meeting each other, and then they were forced together to learn to rely on each other. Their experience is unlike anything we will ever get to experience, but we can still learn from them. And that's the purpose of telling stories, so we don't feel so alone. All in all, I'd give this book 6 out of 5 stars. I know. But it was beautiful. The world building, the meaningful themes, and it still manages to make you laugh. I say if a book can do all of that, it deserves 6 stars. Thank you for listening to According to Your English Teacher. Please make sure to share this episode with a friend. And if you've listened to this point, please review this podcast. I don't think I've gotten any reviews, and your review would just elevate this podcast to the next level. It would mean so much to me if you left a review, so please do that before you leave. I'd like to leave you with one last quote. This is a quote on the back of the book, so it's only fitting that we end here. A person is more than their experiences stacked up like stones. Our best moments are the foundations we use to reach for the sky. Again, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I wrote this episode and it was edited by Dallin Gunther. Our music was written by Tom Brenton. We hope you enjoyed this and happy reading. Next week, we will be discussing Crescent City 1. So, please stay tuned.